But let's face it, life isn't fair, and you never know the path a person took to get to where they are. This is an episode where we are exploring the stories of individuals who inspire us to live our best lives. I had the pleasure of speaking with Lucy Buffett, a woman whose journey from a small-town girl to a successful restaurateur is nothing short of remarkable. I'm curious, what challenges did she face along the way, and how did she overcome them? This is Living It Up with Lenise. I am so happy to speak with you. It is such a treat. And now for a second time. The first was when you joined me on Fox 10 News during my 4 o'clock newscast to talk about your debut in the musical Grease, when it was being performed by the Eastern Shore Repertory Theater under the stars in downtown Fairhope.
Good. I'm going to try not to walk over you. You know I'm a big talker.
Listen, I love it. And that is the beauty of podcasting, versatility and connection. Please introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I am Lucy Buffett, and I am from Mobile, Alabama, and I own Lulu's down in Gulf Shores, if anybody needs to know that, and 2 other places. Is that more info than you need?
This is going to be a lot of fun, and I have to say, I have been to your Gulf Shores restaurant countless times. Lulu's is this vibrant restaurant, just a family fun destination where every dish comes from recipes that were created right in the kitchen of Miss Lucy Buffett. The menu features fried okra, shrimp and fried gumbo, and everyone's favorite, that Key West bowl filled with Cuban rice, black beans, and Mama's turnip greens, topped with guacamole or your choice of unicorn fish, jumbo shrimp, or chicken tenders. The Lulu's location in Gulf Shores is located off the Intracoastal Waterway, or as the locals call it, the ditch, right?
You know, Lulu's was one of the first businesses that was constructed back on the ditch. People always before in Gulf Shores wanted to be on the beach. And I wanted to be on the beach too. I thought that was going to be, build a restaurant, it'll be on the beach. And what I really wanted to do was be a writer. I thought I'll just sit out on the porch and I'll write and it'll be easy. And none of that came to pass. Now, what did come to pass is that it wasn't easy. I didn't sit on the porch. I started working because I've been working since I was 20 years old. And so I got in and was cooking, doing the admin piece. And later on, several years into it, I thought, wow, I think we've sold 100,000 T-shirts. If we sold 100,000 T-shirts, I bet I could write a book, self-publish it, and I could sell 10,000 books. And kind of that's what I did. So, and my dream was to write books, and I got to my dream through becoming a restaurateur.
Most people start a restaurant because they like the idea of being their own boss, or they want to create a unique dining experience they feel is missing. Then there are some people who are just looking for a way to express their passion for food. Did food play a significant role in your family's life as you were growing up?
Absolutely. Now, my mother and father were shipyard workers, sort of white collar, middle management in a big corporation at shipyards. My mom worked in what was called at the time industrial relations. My dad was over in the estimating department. So they were workers, right? I mean, I don't have a memory of my mom being a homemaker at all. She went back to work like when I was 6 weeks old, and that was kind of unheard of, right? Back in those days. But both of my grandmothers were wonderful cooks that did different types of cuisine. And it was a mandatory in our lives that every other Sunday, we went to one of my grandmothers for Sunday lunch. And that is the influence that food had on me. Now, as far as my parents growing up, my parents got paid on the 1st and the 15th. It was, we were not poor, but we were very much lower middle class. There was like never enough. And my parents had made a decision to send us to private schools, Catholic schools that cost them more money than they could afford. And, but they did it because my mother believed in education. And it paid off in the long run, obviously, right? But on the Friday night after either the 1st or the 15th, the big treat for us is that we would go to a restaurant on the causeway and we'd get to go out to dinner. And so that's where my love of, but really, I think you just love what you know. And what we knew was the big thing we could get was fried crab claws. That was the expensive thing on the menu, which, by the way, it still is if you can find them. And we got treated to that. And so food has been a big motivator in my family because it's just the way both of my grandmothers, in a modern term, it was their love language. And as a child, because my mother worked all summer, I got shipped to one of my grandmothers during the summer. My grandmother Buffett, she was raised by a woman who owned a boarding house in Goche, Mississippi. Her cooking was like boarding house cooking, right? Wonderful. Several meats, several vegetables, several desserts. And that's what we had on most Sundays. My other grandmother was a working woman, and she ran the commissary at a girls' finishing school called Gulf Park College, which is now part of the University of Southern Mississippi. And so what we had to do was when we went to see her last name was Peets, my Granny Peets, we had to dress up in our finery. We had to have little gloves on, little Mary Janes, and we had to eat in the big dining room where these gals were being fed at this girls' finishing school. So it was a very different. It was like fancy food, crab meat au gratin, and the big steamship rounds of beef that were being carved by a chef with a big, tall chef's hat. So those two sort of ways of juxtaposing, I guess that's the word, those different types of cuisine were really influential. And I didn't really realize that imprint until later on as I became a young adult. And I had a young family and I needed to learn how to cook. And so I taught myself how to cook from actually the Mobile Junior League cookbook called Jubilee. And that's how I learned to cook.
I'm not sure if it's the same for everyone, but there is something magical that happens when you cook, whether you're a gourmet chef, a home cook, or a beginner looking to experiment. Cooking activates all the senses, your sense of touch, smell, sight, taste, hearing, the sounds of garlic sizzling in the pan, or the laughter of people just enjoying a good meal. Not to mention the texture of food when you're blending those ingredients together. Food is an active trigger for deeper memories, feelings, and emotions. Those eternal stages of mind and body. We all have food memories, some good, some bad. I'd love to know what memories are triggered for you when you walk into a room or when you're cooking and then you instantly find yourself transported back in time, maybe to a time with your grandmother. Was there a certain dish she made that evokes a strong memory?
Absolutely. So, of course, my grandmother Buffett was the gumbo cook, and she cooked a gumbo every Friday. It was a seafood gumbo because we couldn't have meat, right, on Friday, being raised Catholic. And so she had a pot of gumbo on Friday, and of course, that always stayed part of the menu over the weekend. So the smell of a roux cooking, Lenise, is, it's just flour browned in fat. So it could be any kind of fat. And in the days of, it was bacon grease in those days. So that kind of smell takes me immediately back. And as I became a young cook and now an older, I'm going to call myself an older cook.
All right, you can say an old cook. I'll say a seasoned one, because we all know a food that is seasoned tastes better. Now, a roux, as you mentioned, is that mixture of fat and flour that's cooked together. It can be used as a thickening agent in sauces, as you know, soups and stews. There are 3 different types of roux, which I didn't know. A white roux, mostly used for soups and chowders, a blonde roux for sauces, and then brown roux have that nutty flavor with less thickening power than your lighter roux. Not to be confused with a bechamel, which is actually made from a roux, only you whisk in milk. Either way, there's constant stirring involved. And if you're making a gumbo, I'm told a roux is crucial.
When you cook a gumbo and you do the roux and you hand stir the roux for as long as it takes to get it the color you want it to be, and it's all sort of subjective, right? Because most people who cook gumbo are cooking it like their mother cooked it or their grandmother cooked it. And so at the end of that day, you end up smelling just like roux all until you jump into that shower. It's all up in your hair and your clothes. And so that totally transports me. Interestingly, my dad, who it was his mother, Buffett, he was a great cook. My mom didn't like it so much. She could do a few things, but she wasn't a great cook. But my dad cooked. Once we got old enough, as teenagers, we didn't want to go to our grandmothers. And then older on, my dad and mom started doing there's some people came to my mom's house and my dad's house for Sunday meal, and my dad cooked, and he had about 4 or 5 things. He could make a spaghetti, he could fry chicken like nobody's business, and then he'd make my grandmother's potato salad, which is different. He could do a roast on the grill, and he could do a white navy bean soup. So that rotated depending on the season. And any of those just remind me of him and that cooking and bringing together. I think food's the great equalizer, right? It just brings everybody together. And for me, those smells just remind me of home, because now, although I didn't grow up in a home that had those smells, I was visiting frequently my grandmother's homes or experiences. And I was so young that then I started incorporating those into my early 20s in my own life.
Traditions. It's interesting hearing you talk about your family dynamics when it comes to traditions and eating. My mother didn't cook very much. She had a few dishes in her repertoire that I loved and look forward to, all of which I am happy to say I know how to make now. But my Aunt Brenda was a fabulous cook. Pies, cakes, greens, dressing, soul food. In Detroit, people would travel to the east side to buy her dinner plates and desserts, and she never shared her recipes. I can remember being in the kitchen, hiding under the table, trying to sneak a peek at her technique before she'd find me and push me out of the room. I guess it was then that my curiosity for wanting to learn how to cook showed up then. When did you know that you liked cooking?
I think, we did a lot of, for me, when I realized that I loved cooking, then I realized, something that I loved, it was easier for me to accomplish, right? Because my love of it made me want to learn more. So I was able to finally, and through just maturing, I became the cook in the family, and that's through my 20s and 30s. So the rituals were, if there was going to be a gathering of the family, that I would be initiating the cooking. And we did, my brother bought my mother and her dream house, my mom and dad. The first house he bought for his wife in Aspen, Colorado. And the second house he bought for my mother and Daphne. And they were able to live on the water. It had been their dream to always be able to live on the Eastern Shore on the water. When we were young, they worked with people who had second homes on Mobile Bay. And those people would let us use them. And when we went on vacation, we rented a house on Mobile Bay, and that was our big vacation, right, for 1 week. And then the longer my parents worked, they got 3 weeks vacation. So they might rent the house for 2 weeks. And for us, our summers as kids, we grew up on Mobile Bay on the Eastern Shore. So it was the dream always. But, never in their lifetime would they be able to afford a second home doing that. I mean, they lived a good life and everything, but it was not in the cards for them to do that. So early in the early 80s, maybe, my brother bought that home for them in Daphne. And it became a total tradition that on Sundays, we had people come over. We played volleyball out in the yard. We were out on the end of the pier. My father ended up making a complete way before fancy entertaining. He had his shipyard version of entertaining on the end of the pier. And it was a huge grill that he had fitted out at the shipyard. It was a place to boil the crabs and the shrimp if there were jubilees, or for us to have big boils. They had the best retirement because they lived on in Daphne, and they had a good, almost, probably 15 to 20 years of living their dream in Daphne.
Okay, a few things stood out there. The Jubilee first. I want you to explain that.
So a Jubilee is this phenomenon that happens in two places in the world. One is Mobile Bay and one is somewhere in Japan. And so here's what happens. There are several elements that happen, and I'm not going to give you the scientific technical. Somebody can look that up. But what does happen is this. The tide is low. It is very still. There's been an infusion of fresh water. In other words, there's been an afternoon summer rain, right? On Mobile Bay, it's going to rain for about 20 minutes to 40 minutes every afternoon. It's just called your summer squall. So that fresh water goes into the brackish water. Something happens with the oxygen levels. I don't know why, but you may have a crab jubilee where all the crabs simply rush to shore. Or it could be a flounder jubilee, or it could be a shrimp jubilee, or it could be all of them. And when I was growing up, there was some air conditioning units, right? But mainly, people did not have air conditioning on Mobile Bay. They might have one room air conditioned, the parents' bedroom, right? And the kids slept on sleeping porches, and their windows were up. So you kind of knew the signs of a jubilee. It could be a jubilee tonight, right? So you may just decide to stay up all night on your pier. And when it starts happening and you start seeing the eels start coming in first, and then all of a sudden you can see it gets very, very low tide. And all of a sudden the seafood is rushing, and you're using these floundering lamps, and you're walking along with a big old galvanized tub that's floating, and you're just literally scooping up hundreds of crabs or your gigging flounders, and you just do it all night long. As dawn breaks, you start processing all that seafood to go in your freezers, right? At the end of the pier, and you start cooking it too. You're starting to cook it. So it was this unbelievable experience as a kid.
It really is magical. I had the fortune of seeing one up close, and it is as you describe it, Lucy. I should mention, though, several factors are involved for a jubilee to happen, specifically certain environmental conditions. First, you need an east wind, calm bay, and a rising tide, which is what causes the oxygen-depleted fish to go to the top. The best way I can describe a jubilee in Mobile Bay is a phenomenon. All the fish and other marine life are literally shoved to the top of the water. And yeah, people come with their nets and hands, buckets, grabbing all that they can. It usually happens very early in the morning in the summertime. Daphne is actually known as the Jubilee City, and seafood plays an important role here, with restaurants lining the water. That brings me back to Lulu's. What was your dream? I know you said a restaurant wasn't your original plan because you really wanted to write books. But when you finally opened Lulu's, what was your dream for the restaurant? I just find it interesting how so many people end up following paths or end up on paths that they never expected.
I love to tell desperate. There was no dream. It was the call of desperation, and I need a job. I moved home to take care of my parents, who were both elderly and ill. My dad had Alzheimer's, and then my mom ended up having a stroke, taking care of him. So I moved back from Los Angeles, where I had been living for almost 10 years. And I came in to just, be that support. I was planning on hopefully leaving there anyway. And But I needed to do something. And honestly, I just got the call that said, do you want to take over this tiny restaurant on Weeks Bay at Fish River? And people knew that I was a good cook because I used to entertain a lot, either at my home or at my parents' home. And so we had lots of people, and we were entertaining every Saturday and Sunday when the weather was great, right? Someone said, do you want to do that? And I had dabbled a little bit working in a deli or doing odd jobs, but I'd never really worked in a restaurant. I was never a restaurant worker. I had no idea, but hard work and taking risks is built into our DNA. So none of that was kind of scary, right? So I didn't start my restaurant until I was 46 years old. That's when I came home. I needed to do something. I was either overqualified or underqualified for any jobs because I had not finished college. I had to get into the work. I had started college, and my mother made sure I learned how to type and take shorthand so I could always have a job just like her. And of course, I resented that as a young woman because I wanted to do more than that. But the irony of that, Lenise, is that me having admin skills is one of the main ingredients to the success of Lulu's, because I knew how to get in the back office and I knew how to be in the front too. You know what? I just made it up as I go. And originally it was just a place for a job and for my kids to come and work and for me to be able to be around where my mom and dad were. And I didn't have any aspiration to be a humongous restaurant or have many units or to be a restaurateur. But it started working and it was fun. And I had a lot of good inspiration and I had a lot of good modeling for my brother, who knew how to take advantage of opportunities. And he was the leader of the band. And so he knew how to, and he worked hard. We all work hard. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe I can do this in a little microcosm. And he was very supportive of that. And I just was working, really making it up as I go for my livelihood, basically. And it all happened with people who were willing to be helpful to me because they loved me. My good friend and I went into business. She took over the bait shop and I took over the little dive restaurant that was 21 seats inside, and that was it. And I put some picnic tables outside, and I opened my restaurant with my 2 grown daughters and 6 other people. There were 9 of us. So we just made it up. And because I'd always worked since I was 21, I had some experiences. I had experiences for working in big corporations and doing big things. I've worked in small jobs. I've had a lot of great jobs. I've had a lot of not great jobs. I've worked for some great people. I definitely worked for some not great people.
I think we've all had the pleasure of working with extra patience people, as I describe them. These are people who teach us, in the long run, lessons that can be hard to see when you're learning them, but they help us to realize what we're not going to settle for, what we don't want out of our lives. Ultimately, not nice people challenge us to be better. That said, they're not fun to be around.
Yeah, and you're just, because I don't know where this is going out, but I'm being very PG. Normally I cuss at this point about the not very nice people. Anyway, I just did it day by day by day, and I was grateful to be able to be close to my mom and dad and be with them in their last years. I had gone into therapy when I was 29 years old, so by the time I was 46, I had a lot of good coping skills, and I'd gotten over a lot of issues, and I had given myself permission. But that's an ongoing job to this day, by the way, right? Being self-reflective, but you gotta figure out your issues and how you contribute to your challenges. Some of them are just there, and then you definitely have all the power in how you respond to the challenges, right? Those are things I had to learn. to become an independent and self-actualized woman. It was very important to me. Somebody asked me the other day, what is the proudest thing? Actually, my therapist I'm going to now, I said, the thing of course, I love my family. Don't get me wrong. But when you think about something that I accomplished, is that I accomplished being a self-sustaining human being. I am not dependent on anyone. And boy, does that give you freedom, right?
Talk about the importance of therapy and doing the work. I'm encouraged by the conversation now surrounding mental health. Having been there and having to do the work, I'm curious. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. I used to not like that expression. It felt so vague to me, but it's true. I may be completely unaware of my misgivings until it's brought to my attention. Some of our issues or shortcomings, they show up as bright, red, flashing warning signs, but others don't. They can be really subtle, and it can be hard to know what you should look for so that you then know how to improve.
Well, yes, I think you work on the ones that are causing you the most problem to begin with. And then if you embrace healing your heart and your soul and your, I think we all come in with some core wounding, either that we bring in with us or that we experience in our family lives. Because we're all human beings and we are not perfect. So I think the ones that are causing the most problem in your life, and boy, I knew those ones. And it was with health, really. I went into, like I said, with therapy and finding mentors for that, coaches for my mental well-being, finding inspirational spiritual leaders that spoke to me and my longing. And then if you are willing, I think people have the opportunity to say, wow, this has helped me. Because I think we always find out we all have blind spots. Everybody has a blind spot or several blind spots. And I think that's what you're talking about with those issues where you don't know. And I think we know more than what we're willing to admit sometimes, right? It's just rigorous self-examination, and you're just willing to, I wanted to be happy. And, for me, I looked at everything half full, and the life has given me all these challenges. Everybody else seems to have it easier. Well, I had to learn. It's through help, and it's through professional help that I had to learn. A lot of my choices led to those challenges, right? So when you start taking responsibility for your choices, it's, at 29, I didn't feel nearly as like I do now, right? It was like, oh, it's so hard and blah, blah, blah. So it's a process, and it's a maturation process. But I do believe going into that also allowed me to be successful and deserving of success, and all of those kind of decisions that we make as children that really are not, I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. My sister was beautiful. I was cute, right? That kind of thing. My sister, by the way, was the beauty and the superstar. My brother and I were kind of like, whatever. He was, he didn't become all involved in his eventual career until had gone away to college his first year. He wasn't a musician at 4, 5, 6, or 7. He picked up the guitar as a freshman in college, and he learned to play it because girls loved that. And he was kind of geeky. So anyway, I think of course I was adorable and beautiful, but in my little eyes, my sister was more of a beauty. So, those are actually those are untruths that we tell ourselves and that we end up believing. And I think you need some help to unravel those and let those go. I mean, depending on what your behavior is that is causing you some problems, it's out there all over. And for me, I was in another relationship. I was unhappy in a marriage. And I thought, wait a minute, I want to be happy and I need some help. And I asked around and I found a therapist at 29. And then I realized that I am not crazy. And I realized There was potential. I mean, I was really just textbook. We all think we're a little special, and a lot of us are just textbook. I was. And as I free myself as building my own self-esteem, for me, work has always been an esteem builder, right? So if I get good at work, at something I do, that helped build my self-esteem because I was a bit of a rebel. I was in trouble a lot. I was going to skip school and I did all of that. I had a lot of fun. And like I said, I was a risk taker until they called my daddy. So, but that stuff wasn't that as I got to be an adult, it wasn't working real well for me, right? So anyway, it was a process. I was not nearly as wise as I am now. I had to work through a whole lot of stuff. And by the time I was 46 years old, I had worked through a lot of that stuff. So I had skill sets in emotional well-being, right? There was a whole 12-step and codependency and all of that stuff was kind of unfolding, those types of therapies. And they really spoke to me. And I'm self-taught at everything I've done. And I'd love to go back to college. I may one day. Joe Bonner is he and his wife frequently come to Lulu's. I've known him for a long time. I saw him out in the parking lot and I said, he yelled and said hello to me. And I went to talk to him. I said, I want to go back to college and get my degree. He said, well, come on, let's do it. He said, I'd love to be able to give you a degree. And my mother, when she retired from the shipyard, she went back to the University of South Alabama and she got her degree at 65 years old. So I really want to. But I also said, what we really should do, though, is get the communications department and get them to do a documentary of me coming back to get my college degree and also trying to run this humongous and very challenging 3 500-seat restaurants in 3 different states situation. It could be kind of fun.
Lucy Buffett is living proof that it's never too late to build the life that you're meant to live. From a teenage mother to a yacht chef and Hollywood assistant to a successful restaurateur, she's overcome addiction, loss, and so many other challenges along the way, as we all have. And for Lucy, she was able to create something entirely her own.
We're not our avatars. It looks like my life is just, you go on social media and you put up the most beautiful picture of you and you see thousands of people and it just looks, but there's the other flip side of that too, which is the real life piece. And I just think it's the self-satisfaction, because the other piece around that is I'm a great believer in paying it forward, because it's only through other people that helped me, my family, my friends, people who saw promise in me and said, wow, I love what you're doing. Let me help you, right? And by the time I was 46 years old or 52 years old, that when I built the big Lulu's, I was able to say, okay, thank you. It's hard to accept help sometimes, right? It's hard to ask for help. And I was like, yes, because I knew I could pay it forward. Hopefully one day. That was always part of the foundational building blocks of Lulu's. And the people who helped me, they didn't need my help, but can I pay it forward? And one of the building blocks of Lulu's was, if I was going to do this, and I had never done it, then I wanted Lulu's to be the type of company that I would want to work for as a single mother with 2 kids, which meant it had to have benefits. It had to have values. We had to work together. It was open to everyone. We were doing it for the single cause of our livelihoods to this day still, right? I also wanted to bring a professionalism into serving and hospitality business that told people, look, if you want to just be here for the summer and make some good cash, which is a lot of how that has been looked at down here in these seasonal restaurants, that's fine. But if you want to be able to have a job that's going to pay you and so that you have your life is comfortable and you can provide for your children. That's what I wanted to do. And way before it was mandated, the first thing I did was put health insurance in because my mother said, you got to have a job with health insurance. I mean, that was what happened, right? That's just how you did it. So now a lot of people who are more in a modern day that they want the experience of their lives to be quality. Both of those are valid, by the way. Okay. But I came from, you had to work hard to get it. That's one of the wounds I had to work on, is because then I only wanted to work at everything that was hard. Like it had to be hard to be valid. That was an awakening I had to get with professional help, right? It had to be hard. So I wanted that to be an option of professionalism so that they feel good about what they were doing. And these days, those are still in place, by the way, because I just this past year had to go back and redefine and put on the page what our core values are. And, respect and appreciation is definitely one of them for ourselves, for each other, and for our customer. Anyway, I'm all over the place, sister. It's my ADD. I'm hard to live with, but I get a lot done.
Through it all, she's remained authentic, vulnerable, and remarkably resilient. Speaking with her was like settling into one of the restaurant booths at Lulu's, where the conversation flows just as easy as the sweet tea, filled with laughter, honesty, and the kind of warmth that just makes you want to stay a little longer. We could have talked for hours, and we almost did. I have to say, it was such a pleasure speaking with you.
See, we persevered. We had some technical difficulties and we persevered. Thank you, Thomas. I was cussing. I was cussing like the sailors in my family. And I said, Thomas, can they hear me on the other end? He said, no. I said, okay, great. You have a beautiful day. And thank you, sweetheart.
Living It Up with Lenise has been a joint production of the Fox 10 podcast and myself, Lenise Ligon, with the music provided by Kendall Faust. A special thanks to Lucy for speaking with me. She embodies the same spirit that draws people to Lulu's: genuine hospitality, comfort food for the soul, and a reminder that sometimes beautiful stories are the ones that take the longest to unfold. Be sure to subscribe to Living It Up with Lenise. And remember, every day is a new opportunity to embrace your own journey. Thank you for listening. Until next time.